So let me introduce Dr. Michael McAfee. His bio is in the program, but I'll just read a portion of it to emphasize some of the great work he's done. He's currently the Vice President for Programs at PolicyLink, and he spent more than 20 years serving as a results-driven leader in government, philanthropic, and human service sectors. He has led cross-sector efforts to invest more than $350 million in our nation's most distressed communities. His efforts have led to the Promise Neighborhood program, and we're going to hear more about Promise Neighborhoods and Promise Zones later, which, in the Promise Neighborhood program became a permanent kind of feature of the federal government in the Every Student Succeeds Act. He's really on a journey to build a legacy grounded in equity and a just and fair inclusion in society in which everyone is fully participating, prospering, and reaching their potential. And with that, Michael, I'd like to invite you to the stage to provide some opening remarks for the conference. Thank you.
I wanted to start this morning by, first of all, thank you for allowing me to be in this space. And I wanted to start by what I was inspired by last night by watching the Golden State and the Lakers. And that is the greatness of the moment and the consciousness that it takes to seize the moment. When we talk about population level accountability, ladies and gentlemen, that is our moment right now. If you go back and you look at all the meta-analysis documents that have been done about large-scale community change work, we know how to do good programs. We know how to do good initiatives. We know how to do good pilots. And we know how to do those at specific developmental stages. But in this moment, this is our moment to begin to reverse all of those intentional policies that designed opportunity out of communities. And so what I hope to do this morning is share some of my own personal insights about how I've managed to step into holding accountability for a population. For me, in my role as the director of the Promise Neighborhoods Institute, that means holding accountability for improving the lives of the 16.5 million children living in poverty in America, even with the small amount of resources that Promise Neighborhoods has to be a part of that equation. So let me start by what I mean by the consciousness. So often when we get into these conversations, we get into them because we've looked at population level data, we've become concerned about that data, and we want to do something. And it is also at that very moment when we look at the population level data that so many of us begin to pull away from the table and realize it's too big and we can't do anything about it. I'm asking you to lean into the table today, to not step away from the table by the daunted nature of the number, by the daunted nature of what's going to be required for us to make change. I'm asking you to hold the anxiety that you'll feel when you think about population level accountability and what it means, and to think about what it means to be in a different relationship with your colleagues in this room and around the world. So here's how I started that journey. I came to this work coming out of poverty. I came to this work being frustrated that opportunity was too random in my own life. When I look at my life and others in my family, radically different life options. And all across the country, you see that same thing, the random nature of opportunity, and I wanted to do something about that. I didn't come into this work just to do good programs in a small area. I wanted to have big impact, even if I entered in a program. What that means for me now, that I have the privilege of serving at PolicyLink and with the Promise Neighborhoods effort, is then how do I take up a level of consciousness and the discipline to deliver that allows us to even get close to the opportunity that's presented in front of us. And so here's how we decided to do that with Promise Neighborhoods. Promise Neighborhoods is a cradle-to-career effort that is really modeled after the successful work of the Harlem Children's Zone. We know all across the country, folks cannot replicate the Harlem Children's Zone, but they can replicate the guiding principles, working at scale, creating a culture of accountability, et cetera. So when we designed that program and supported the White House and the Department of Education in implementing it, there were a couple of conscious decisions that we needed to make. The first was we could have simply ran a grants program and said that that was our contribution, that we will run a grants program. We are not authorized as a program officer to make decisions around compliance or anything like that. But that didn't mean we still couldn't have a role in a contribution that was much larger than our role as a thought partner in creating the program, a technical assistance provider, and a shaper of the public policy that ultimately got codified in the reauthorization of ESCA. So here's what the consciousness means. Consciousness means that no matter where you sit, no matter what your role, that you commit to holding the interest of the population. And that you think about, how then do you bring a discipline that can shape the strategy, drive a different set of conversations, that will then start transforming things on the ground. Here's what we chose to do. Communities are getting $30 million over 5 years to start creating cradle-to-career systems. You can take that money and run a grants program, and what a travesty after 5 years to be done. Not to really influence systems, not really to have worked at scale, but to have done good work, but work that is beneath what we know in the sector about what works, work that is beneath what we know about scaling, and work that is beneath what we know needs to happen in terms of systems change. What we decided to do is actually to put our voice in the room, to say that that in fact is unacceptable. While you have a right to do it, it is close to being participating in malpractice. That point of view ignited a certain level of conflict. And I'm asking you all to think about, what is the conflict that you need to ignite in your system to get folks to think about a new possibility? To not just shake your head and smile and be polite and go along, but to have a robust exchange about what is required of us in this moment. And in that Promised Neighborhoods moment, what was required was for us not to shirk away from our responsibility by doing what is easy for us, to simply run a grants program and do good work. The hard part was for us to start finally holding all of the complexity that we know we need to hold if we're going to get to large-scale population level change. And here's what that means. Can we begin to string together a set of wins, a set of strategies that includes engaging families as real authentic owners in the solution, require that they show up with solutions just like everybody else, and that they're contributing to the outcome, that we're running high-quality programs, absolutely, but that we're also transforming systems and that we're doing the policy work that is necessary to get us to scale, and that we're putting that all together in a coherent strategy. And can we begin to operate with a discipline as opposed to just calling meetings and inviting people into a room and saying, let's work together? Can we hold a discipline? Can we call that discipline out? And ultimately, can we put results front and center in that equation? For Promised Neighborhoods, front and center means having 10 results and 15 indicators that we measure progress by. The discipline is the use of results-based accountability that gives us a greater probability of linking our contributions in a way that will aggregate up to population-level impact. And then there is this notion of showing up in your person, in your role, and in your system. How do you show up to do the work as your person? Do you have the consciousness to want to hold accountability for population level impact? Will you say what needs to be said given the privilege of the rooms that we get to sit in? Will you think innovatively? Will you think about actually creating new markets? Will you call out the inefficiency in the nonprofit sector and propose different solutions? Will you do that work? That's what it means to show up in your person. Is there something you can activate different in your person to help us hold the results framework differently? And then in your role, no matter where you sit, you don't have to be the CEO, you don't have to be in charge, but can you compel others to act in service of the population from where you sit? That is the consciousness that is required to be great in this moment. That we not hide behind the excuse of our title, that we not hide behind formal authority, that we take up our authority for improving the lives of the families that we're privileged to serve no matter where we sit. And then third, can we go into our systems and bring this change back into our systems? Starting with Promised Neighborhoods is how I entered PolicyLink. That's not the end of the work. PolicyLink works on a wide variety of issues. And so the question is, can I take 16.5 million, hold that interest, figure out what we're going to do there, and then can I translate that into somehow figuring out how do we as PolicyLink improve the way we have impact across the country? So now there's a couple of numbers that I'm holding. I'm holding the 16.5 million number because that's how I entered with Promised Neighborhoods. And today I can tell you, after 4.5 years of really intensive implementation, we're at only 300,000 in terms of our contribution to building out that cradle to career system. But something more magically happened when we started holding the interest of the population and discipline. If you ask me what the number is at PolicyLink now, it's the 100 million that are living near or in poverty across the country. So by doing good practice from where I entered and joining with my colleagues at PolicyLink, we've decided now that, you know, we do a lot of things really well, and it's not enough. And we need to hold the organizational interest of the 100 million children and their families living near or in poverty in America. And we need to figure out a new way of articulating how do we go forward. That is really scary. Because when we think about that, even when I think about it in Promised Neighborhoods, what it says is that while the Promised Neighborhoods model is absolutely a powerful model and it is a beacon going forward, it is not enough. Our technical assistance is not enough. Even when we think about the 100 million at PolicyLink, it is not enough. What is not enough is what we're currently doing. That is a disruptive thing to introduce into an organization that has been successful. That even on our best day, it is not enough. And the challenge is not to be daunted by it or disappointed or get frustrated and dejected about the fact that it is not enough. It is to remember why we came to this work in the first place. We came to this work to do great work. We came to this work to make a difference in the world. And we can do it and we can figure it out. But it does mean that we've got to let go of some old constructs. So when we think about Promised Neighborhoods, what it means, I was sharing some of this last night, is that we've got to have more creative policy solutions. Can we begin to start talking about guaranteed income? Can we start talking about the use of how technology can give families greater agency to begin to figure out how to chart their own path out of poverty, as opposed to simply thinking that an inefficient social service sector can do that work? Those are dangerous conversations to have in this political climate. But folks, we've got to get back to creating dangerously. We've got to get back to that. We can do this work. We have markers all along the way of where when we really focus on population level impact, we can achieve it, but there's often great pain. We see that with the Affordable Care Act as a primary example, front and center. It is not perfect, but it is population level impact. We can do this, whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about transportation, whether we're talking about creating communities of opportunity, whether we're talking about health. This is our moment for us to think about solutions. Solutions that can allow us to hold the complexity of the environments which our families exist in. We're not talking about one-offs anymore. We're not talking about one-off solutions. We're talking about complex integrated solutions at scale. That is the work for this moment. And so as you go through this day, what I would like you to think about is this. What is your number? What is your number? What is your organization's number? What is it about how you show up that has to change in service of the people that you see on these posters around the room? What is it about your leadership that has to change? What is it about you in your role that has to become bolder, more courageous in your own way? And then ultimately, what are we going to do in terms of our leadership to help systems leaders focus on what the right work is at this moment in time? The danger when we ever come to meetings like this is that we get seduced by the silver bullet. We get seduced by the new idea. We get seduced by the personality. But there are some things, folks, that seduction just will not help us on. When you look at the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Act as an example, you want to talk about gentrification, communities of opportunity. The Supreme Court handed us a gift that every day municipalities all across this country stump their nose at. That's the work for us to take on. That's not glamorous work. That's hard work. That work is going to force us to talk about race and class and the intentional ways we design opportunities out of communities. But that is this moment. So as you think about solutions, I want you to also hold that there is some work that we just have to do that is not going to be new. It is not going to be a silver bullet. It is not going to be glamorous, but it is the work for this moment. Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing is that work. Dealing with housing is that work. Improving health is that work. Creating pathways into being able to compete for living wage jobs that allow you to take care of your family is our work. And to do that in its entirety, not in one-offs. We're at an exciting inflection point in the work. I came into this field 23 years ago, and I've had the benefit of watching seminal leaders like Ralph Smith, Angela Glover Blackwell, Manuel Pasteur, and others. And I used to sit in some of those rooms where they probably didn't even know I was paying attention. And I used to say, "What? I can't wait till I get my chance. I can't wait till I get a chance to make a difference." I'm here now. I get that chance. And the worst thing I can do is to be afraid of the moment, to be afraid to perform in this moment. And I'm asking you all to think that same thing. When I was thinking about the basketball analogies that I was talking about last night, I thought about, wow, Kobe's body's broken. He's limping along. He's iced up from head to toe. And he still finds a way to be great in that moment. Golden State, a host of reasons why they could have shirked that moment. They stepped into it. And even though they got that record, they still haven't won the championship. There's more work to do. That's our work as well. This is our moment to be great, our moment to not be afraid, or at least to embrace the fear and step into the moment. To realize that if we are in a different relationship with each other, we will support each other and we will get through this together. When I say population level accountability, the accountability piece is us being accountable to each other in different ways. It is about us thinking about what is a different relationship. If the Price School is going to be connected to community and is interested in population level impact, what changes in that relationship? What changes for community members to join in that relationship? That's the work for us to figure out. So when I'm asking you to think about today, think about your number. Think about what are the results that will be at the center of the conversation. And then think about what are ultimately the strategies that will allow you to get to scale. And when I talk about scale, I'm talking about what are the strategies that will allow us to be able to serve at least 50% of the demand in a community. At least 50%. We don't have time to play small anymore. When you look at the population, 100 million, that's a lot of folks who are not doing so great. But when you look at the growth in this country, 92% of it is coming from people of color. Those are the people being left behind. We have a huge threat to our nation, folks, if we don't get this right. We have an opportunity to do great work. We know what works in this community. We know what works across the country. Now the question is, can we put it together in the right community context with the right leaders staying focused for the long term? So thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Hi, good morning. Angelica Solis with the Youth Policy Institute. We're one of the Promise neighborhoods doing work here in Los Angeles, and I'd love to hear from your perspective. What are some of the lessons learned, if you will, around promising practices that move towards systemic change? Perfect.
We're seeing a lot of things in Promise neighborhoods that are really leading to large-scale systems change. So the first is to be able to think about can I use good programmatic practice as the gateway to get people to think about systems and policy changes? So the Promise neighborhood sites are doing a really good job at that. So for example, when you look at school attendance and absenteeism and expulsions, when we talk about children being proficient in core academic subjects, what we started discovering is it's hard to do that when you're kicking kids out of school at disproportionate numbers, right? So the California Alliance for Boys and Men of Color have worked with the state legislature, assembly, and the governor to pass a host of policies to stop kicking kids out. In Minneapolis, the superintendent there said, you know what, before we kick a kid out, I need to see them. I'm going to be the ultimate one who makes that decision. Those came out of folks saying that when I hold the result at the center, I actually can't get there because there is something in the way. It is a policy and a system problem. Those are examples. Other examples would be when you think about mobility rate, and this is why I said hold the complexity. Mobility rate in Promise neighborhoods is about children bouncing from school to school, district to district, house to house throughout the course of a year. Buffalo decided to take their community, CDBG, their community development block grant dollars, they were using them anyway, and decided to figure out how to smartly align them with promised neighborhoods. They started rehabbing houses on a couple of blocks, prioritized those promised neighborhoods families, took their mobility rate from 32% down to like 10 to 12% in a year. But that is an example of smartly using good programmatic practice, linking it up with other ways in which you can work with government and systems. Nothing about it is fancy. It is just that core work that has to happen. So those are examples of what we see leaders doing, that when they think about how they enter, I enter with a program, and can I use that program to leverage up? The last piece I'll say is they enter through a program, and then they decide that, you know what? Yes, I may be serving 5,000 kids in the promised neighborhoods geography, and that is inadequate for population level impact. What I need to do is to think about, how do I improve those lives of those 5,000 and use this example to transform the system? In our case, what we're seeing people do is to use that to transform the school system. They're also starting to use it to get into this notion of what's happening in the environmental context, like the burdensome nature of fees and fines and over-policing. So by starting with good programmatic practice, folks are starting to get into these other issues because they realize they can't achieve their results without addressing them.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sam Olive from Mexico City government. My question is regarding of one of the most important challenges we are facing in Mexico City urban development. We are bringing public-private partnerships tool just to improve different areas of the city. My question to you is how to bring or how to link the message to bring confidence from private stakeholders on the public welfare and just to bring the society more consciousness that we need to improve different areas, bringing private investments. How to link both things, private investment revenues with public welfare.
Perfect. So I will say in some cases, we've got to stop allowing the narratives to stand. And that's part of the problem when we think about the welfare state. In many cases, there are a lot of false narratives that shape the way we think about it, and we entertain that. We got to get clear about the conversation, what's going on with the population, and begin to talk about specifically, do we really have the right narrative? Do we really have a sense of what's going on? This narrative that business is better, or somehow that the nonprofit is more virtuous, are types of frameworks that we bring to the conversation that often get in the way of troubleshooting. I would also say that there is a bias to think that because oftentimes people are of color, the largest populations of folks are of color, that somehow they don't want to work, they don't want opportunity. Those are belief systems, there are frameworks that exist that we don't challenge. And so when you sit down and you start trying to have conversations with people about solutions, those are barriers. It seeps out in a lot of smoke screens. But our job is to help dismantle those barriers and to show a different way. Some of the best ways I've seen folks do it is to help people understand. And you think about the majority of people in poverty, they actually work. They work like 2 jobs. That is a fact. That's not a narrative that is shown. So to me, when I talk about the use of discipline, I prefer not to have conversations without the data in the room, and I prefer not to have conversations where we are actually not unpacking the data to understand it. To me, that is sloppy practice. And when you have sloppy, undisciplined practice, you actually can't combat the framework. It's hard enough even when you have that. So rationality is not an antidote necessarily to just blind ignorance, but it does help us at least be able to engage and try to push the conversation forward. So to me, we need to help people understand how are that 100 million that I described really living? What is really going on with them? And how do we start really playing a leadership role in reshaping that narrative and talking about the value add? We've lost the narrative on so many things that when we think about people of color, often when it comes to like over-policing, we think that incarceration was just the only way. Because we've allowed that to get baked in now, when you start talking about pulling back from that, people are really afraid, even people of color. So what I'm asking you to consider is to start trying to think about what is the disciplined way to have the conversation that is grounded in what we know about the populations. And then this is an example of where we have to put our voice in the room. When you're in the room with the folks who have power and money, do you say what needs to be said? Do you challenge the frameworks and the assumptions that are embedded in the conversation? When we start doing that, we will start shifting people's mindset. We will start shifting the conversation. Thank you.